Hey everyone, welcome to Amplify with Stories of Antisemitism. My name is David. This is Jeremy. And here on Amplify, we talk about everything at the intersection of the church, Israel, and anti-Semitism. So today, Jeremy, we're going to be talking about who we are as an organization.
Who we are.
But first, I think it's important for them to understand who we are as individuals. So who are you?
Who are I? Well, earlier when we were practicing this, I said that I started anti-Semitism, and in fact, I didn't start anti-Semitism. I started stories of anti-Semitism in 2020. I guess the real brief introduction to that is there were really three things that caused me to want to start stories of anti-Semitism. Actually, my wife and I both. But it was number one, finding out for me personally, had a little Jewish blood on both sides of the family that had been concealed for a long time, and finding that out was provoking to me. It needed to understand why that was, that even why would a Jewish person conceal their identity? And of course, World War II anti-Semitism was part of that. So that was a driver. Also finding out or reading about Christian anti-Semitism, which is what we're going to get into on a different episode, but just learning that for the better part of 2,000 years, Christians really have been horrible to the Jewish people, and recognizing that there was sort of a wrong that need to be righted, I guess, and wanting to do something about that. So that was the second thing. Third thing was even in 2020, finding out that anti-Semitism was rising all around us, as my wife and I started saying back in 2020, and recognizing that maybe right now in 2020 was a time when Christians, when the church could kind of arise and stop being silent and inactive and unaware of rising anti-Semitism to really do something about it. So that's why we started Stories of Anti-Semitism. 45 years old. I have a wife. I have 5 kids, actually. So very vibrant, crazy family.
Keeps you busy.
More than busy.
Yeah, it's a full-time job plus a full-time job.
Plus
Nice.
my wife's 4 full-time jobs.
So 6 full-time jobs between the two of you.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
But awesome, Schmidt.
Awesome. Well, I'm David, and I grew up in Wisconsin in the United States, moved to Colorado when I was 13. And I have been a Christian since I was 19, but I grew up going to church. Most of my extended family is actually Catholic in Wisconsin. There's a large Catholic population, and I love my extended family very much. But like I said, 19, I really started to take my faith seriously, even though I went to church as a kid. And I'm currently married, and I've spent some time serving in the church for the last maybe 5 or 6 years, and spent some time kind of traveling around the world with some friends and just kind of figuring out who I am. And I'm 28 now. And
You know who you were.
oh yeah.
Oh,
I have all the answers.
And you have a wife, too.
I do have a wife. I met her when I was in Southeast Asia, and I love her very much. And we've been married.
Glad to.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Babe, please be glad. And we've been married about a year. And I joined Stories of Anti-Semitism. It was September of 2023. So you and I had sat down for coffee. And I had just gone through some rough stuff. Some plans of mine fell apart pretty hard, some pretty rough relational fallout. And we were just sitting at a coffee shop, and I was just kind of trying to talk to someone that was uninvolved and didn't have the drama and the baggage connected to them. And so as we were talking, you were like, David, I started Stories of Antisemitism.
This was my recruitment pitch.
Exactly. This was the recruitment pitch. You're like, we really need some help. And this is kind of how you can conceptualize what we do in the community. And it took me maybe about a week, and I was like, yes, absolutely. I think I want to do this. Because I just, like I said, some stuff had fallen apart. So I was looking for what to do next. And
I caught you on the way down, bro.
You did. I didn't hit rock bottom because of you.
Wow, I'm so glad.
So thank you. But that was, like I said, September 2023. And now I'm working with university outreaches, working on our social media, help with events. Normally, I'm the guy behind the camera. So this is a little foreign for me.
Sure.
It's a little different. But
Great.
So like my dad always says, I have a great face for radio. So I'm really trying to implement that. All right. So two things that are important for us to keep in mind, Jeremy.
Yes.
Right? We have, well, I should say one thing, but really two parts of one thing. We have a very diverse audience and followership. We have a Jewish audience, either in the United States or in Israel for the most part, which we're super thankful if you are Jewish and you're watching our podcast. We're just glad that you're listening in. We're hoping that this is going to be an opportunity for you to kind of hear from our perspective, from our unique background of how Christians are trying to stand up against anti-Semitism and stand with you guys. So, but then we have a Christian audience.
Have a Christian audience.
So what would you want to say to both kind of our types of our audience right now?
Yeah, I think it's real simple. It's don't be silent. 3 words. Don't be silent. That's continually our message to our Christian community, as I mentioned earlier. Finding out about history and the history of Christian anti-Semitism made me realize we've got 2 problems, or 2 kind of key characteristics, core characteristics of how we've dealt with the Jewish people and anti-Semitism. We've either been complacent, inactive, or complicit. We've actually been a part. And so we need Christians right now to rise up, get out of their comfort zones, and just begin to engage with this topic and speak up about it.
Yeah.
Listen, if you're a Christian and you're watching, that's what we hope you'll take away. We hope that you'll feel inspired. And we hope that you'll develop kind of a deeper understanding of the issues at hand so that you feel more confident, I guess, in speaking up in a time when if we're honest, I think it is a little bit intimidating to kind of put your neck out there and stand up for your Jewish friend or speak out against anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Awesome. And you touch both what you said to our Jewish audience and Christian audience. You said,
I think you summed it up well. We want our Jewish audience to hear these crazy Christians talking and going, who the heck are these guys? Wow, it's really interesting to hear their perspective. I didn't know that about Christians. I didn't know Christians thought that. I better understand why Christians are motivated to help. And so hopefully that's the benefit. Hopefully maybe as a Jewish person, you go, man, now I know what to say to my Christian coworker or to the Christian student in my class or whatever, maybe because of the benefit of hearing some of the things on this podcast.
Yeah, we hope it's helpful.
Absolutely.
And it builds bridges. That's one of the things we're going to talk about later that we really have a focus on. So, well, this episode, like we said, is kind of a get to know you episode. We already know each other, but our audience has no idea who we are. So you have about 5 different things or aspects of our organization that you want to talk about. But how would you start? How would you describe stories of anti-Semitism briefly? I guess not briefly, but
yeah, we don't want to be brief because we're super, not briefly though. But I think I've got 5 distinctives written down. I think for our Christian audience, the way I want to say it is like this, a little tongue-in-cheek. We're not your grandma's ministry to Israel. Okay, what do I mean by that? You're going to find out as I go through these distinctives. But we're not trying to be different or novel for the sake of being different or novel. But in the times that we're living in, things need to be done just a little bit differently than maybe they have been over the course of history.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I think makes us distinct, or at least is a distinctive for us, is that we're a kind of a mobilizing type of organization. I mentioned earlier, we don't want Christians to be silent. But the way that we walk that out, or the way that we try to impact Christians, is by holding events, getting into churches. Man, for the first 2 years that we started Stories of Anti-Semitism, lots of work was done in churches to just tell Christians, hey, here's the issue of rising anti-Semitism. Here's why it's important. And here's why you need to understand Christian anti-Semitism. And so we love to mobilize and equip Christians to be active in the community. So that's the first one.
Well, you just said something over and over again that I think is important to highlight. You just said the word Christian about 17 times. So for our Jewish audience,
sorry, Jewish friends.
No, we're not, we're not trying to hide the fact that we are Christians at all, but it's important. I mean, how we're trying to speak to our Christian audience, particularly for the purposes of education and mobilization, right? And so, yes, this is not a religious podcast. That's not the goal of this podcast, but we are going to speak using some language that it is associated with religion, and we are people of faith. And so, and that purpose is to mobilize and to educate for particularly our Christian audience. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So just wanted to point that out. All right, number 2, Jeremy, I feel like I should be the one saying this, number two, because the number two is that we're young.
You're young.
I'm young.
45. You can see the gray hair in my beard, but we aim for a young audience.
Yes, yeah, and I have gray hair. I mean, you probably in crisp 4K, you can probably see right here that I have some gray. But
Immature aging. I'm so sorry.
yeah, you stress me out. So
Fair enough.
So, but our focus really is on reaching younger people. And so one of the major ways that one of the reasons that we do that is we find that a lot of anti-Semitism is coming from younger groups, people that are young adults.
Yeah.
What
about college campuses?
Yeah, college campuses is one place where we're seeing that a lot.
Yep. That's why we go there.
That is why we go there. We go to college campuses in order to have conversations, in order to be a presence for our Jewish neighbors to see that we actually care enough about them to show up during times where they're struggling or times where they're going through some things. But one of our goals is to really take those people that are in the middle, the ones that aren't crazy polarized, because we found that for the most part, it's very difficult to change their minds and hearts. Not that we don't want to talk to them. I appreciate anyone that will talk to us, but on campuses, getting to talk to those in the middle, the younger students that are trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And that really is part of number three, right? That's education.
Just go back to the young people part real quick. The statistic that I saw maybe a year ago was that I think about 75% of Jewish students, American Jewish students on college campuses, have experienced anti-Semitism. And that tells us that there's a huge need on campuses, both for advocates and allies who would get out there, stand with their Jewish friends, encourage them, be near to them, just help Jewish students know that somebody has their backs.
Yeah.
But then also to talk to all those undecided kids, because I feel like in our campus outreaches, I guess that's what we call them, there's a decent number, maybe as much as 50% of the students that we talk to who really are not well educated or well informed. In fact, some literally have no idea. They don't even know how to define anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, which is shocking to me because it's in the news all the time. And so it feels like, young college age students probably have heard way too much about this, but it seems that they're skipping over it. And so there's a huge opportunity for work on college campuses and with those young people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. And one of the things that we do with the young people, and not just young people, people of all ages, is we educate, and we are a group that focuses on advocacy as well. So you want to talk about those two things?
Yeah. I mean, when I think of advocacy, I think of you and our other team members, going to CU Boulder or CSU in Fort Collins, and the signs that we put out say, anti-Semitism sucks.
Yeah.
One side, the other one says anti-Semitism is rising all around us. Who cares? We do. And, just the signs themselves, and they're black and gold, really attracts a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And of course, we want to be that kind of presence. We're not trying to be disruptive or stir the pot, but we do want people to notice. And what happens when people notice is they come over, and usually the assumption is you're a Jewish group. And we say, no, we're a Christian group. And especially the Jewish students are like, wow, that's really crazy. I didn't know that there were any non-Jews out there who would speak up. So the advocacy part is really important. And I think we like being bold to get out there and just kind of stick our necks out and be super present on campuses. But we're also doing that in the community too, by bringing Christians and Jews, and even sometimes people that are neither one, into some of our events and things. We get active in the community. We're active with some of our government leaders, just trying to strengthen and give people more permission to be more bold over the issue. And so I think that's where advocacy is expressed within our work.
Awesome.
Oh, and education.
Education, yeah.
Lumped them together.
Yep.
Advocacy and education. Education mostly is for the Christian community.
Yeah.
And the thing that I love the most about educating the Christian community is it's easy when we just grab one of our Jewish friends and say, come to this church.
Yeah.
And just tell your story. I think you and I, we can get in front of a group of Christians and talk to them about statistics and the history of anti-Semitism by Christians and things like that. And everybody kind of listens intently. You bring a Jewish friend in who says, here's my experience, And all the Christians are they're just glued to this person. And oftentimes they're just so surprised to hear what their Jewish friends have gone through or are going through. So a lot of our education is kind of wrapped around just getting Jewish people in front of Christians to wake them up and to make them better allies, better friends.
Absolutely. Understanding one another. I think that's another thing that we're really excited for this podcast is for our Jewish friends and for our Christian friends. Like, there's not a lot of interaction, and if there, at least from what I've seen, there's some exceptions. Like our friend Hallie, she's awesome. She gets to work with a bunch of different organizations on campuses, and we need more people like that. But for the most part, there's not a whole lot of interaction, and if there is, it's not. It often doesn't go deep enough for there to be a deep understanding of how one another think and how things are impacting one another. So with this podcast, even, we're hoping to be able to help our Jewish audience understand who we are, why we care, how we think, because then I think solidarity is going to be far more easier to achieve, and it'll be much stronger when it is achieved if we're able to come to a mutual understanding a little bit deeper, not just at a surface level.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about taking solidarity deeper. One of the things that was so dear to my heart in the beginning of starting stories of anti-Semitism was the idea of sort of reconciliation, right? That there's some historical, a historical wound that has been caused by Christians, by the church, that needs to be dealt with, and hopefully could even be healed. And so we're a bridge in the sense that we're Christians coming to the Jewish community and trying to kind of connect those dots, connect those communities, but for the sake of a healing or a reconciliation. Whereas Christians, we can just look our Jewish friend in the eye and say, I know we as Christians have been on the wrong side of this issue far too many times over the last 2,000 years. Jewish-Christian relations have not been good, and we've caused you, your friends, your family, your people, a lot of pain. And I've had the opportunity to say that. To be clear, I've never had a Jewish friend say, man, you know what you guys did to us? I've never had a Jewish friend say that in a million years. Not one time has that happened. But at the same time, when I've led with that or when I brought that up, my goodness, it just, sometimes there's tears. It's always just, because it's heartfelt, I think it really goes a long way. And what it tells our Jewish friends is we're really serious about standing with you against anti-Semitism. So much so we're we're outing ourselves and our misfortunes, our
missteps, but bigger than that in a lot of ways.
More than a misstep, it's the horrific things that we've done. And so being reconciliation focused is important to us, but we're not trying to force that, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
We're mostly just trying to be a blessing to Jewish friends.
And a lot of what you say, by the way, I mean, what you just said about reconciliation and the pain Christians have caused the Jewish people over the past couple thousand years. Many Christians, and I was one of those before I started working here, probably don't know what you're talking about. And we're going to have an episode discussing the history of Christian anti-Semitism after the church was founded up until the modern day. That's going to be episode 2. And so stay tuned for episode 2, where we're going to have an overview about that. But it's important to understand, not so we can bash the church or so we can shame people, but so we can, once again, motivate and come to an understanding, right? Why has it gotten to the point that it is? Super important to understand. So there's one more that we kind of touched on, but I think all of what we do is involved with this final one, which is we are a bridge. And so we're really trying to bring the two communities together.
Yeah.
So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've said it. I think maybe you're getting the picture. We straddle a lot of lines. I feel like, the Christian community is used to one type of, parachurch ministry is what we call it in Christianity, that does things one way or another way. Maybe there's 2 or 3 types of ways, and we kind of straddle all of those. Plus, we're in the Jewish community, like working to be known and seen as allies and friends. We're justice oriented. All of those things just put us where we have kind of 1 feet in 2 lanes or in 2 worlds. And the only way I can describe that work is that we're a bridge. We're trying to bring people together, which I think is very important right now, where especially when things related to Israel and Jewish people are so polarizing that people are being driven apart. We want to do the opposite. Let's bring everybody together. Let's
Yeah.
be human beings that just talk and are civil and love one another and are respectful of one another. And that's kind of our shtick, if I can say that.
Our shtick. Yep, there you go. So there's all 5 of the things that we wanted to mention.
There's probably more, but those are the ones that I felt were the most important to say.
Yep.
At SOA.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I mean, that's kind of who we are. There's a couple of things that are important to understand about kind of some things. It's not like we don't want to focus on the negative of who we are, but it's important. One particular thing that we're not trying to do is,
we're not trying to make Christians Jewish or Jewish or Jewy. We want Christians to be Christians. We do have friends that they get into the Jewish roots of the faith sometimes and really kind of elevate this idea of trying to be Jewish. The way I heard one person say it was, there's Christians that are out there shaking their family tree as hard as they can to see if a kippah falls out. We're not trying to get Christians to do that. We want Christians just to be those Gentile friends that love their Jewish friends and are the best allies and friends and advocates that the Jewish people have.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've heard many of our Jewish friends say, or they really ask the question, is there anyone outside of the Jewish community that is going to stand up and call this what it is, call anti-Semitism what it is, which is evil? Does anyone have our backs? I remember our friend Jackson from CSU said that. Does anyone have our backs outside of the Jewish community? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, yes, we do. We're Christians, and we're going to fill that role because it's needed. And we're going to be who we are, but we're going to stand unashamedly, no strings attached, loving and standing with our Jewish community.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, there are some really important questions that might have been coming up. People's gears might be turning as we're having these conversations. They naturally come up. So we're going to try and read your mind, and we're going to try and ask some questions ahead of time, hopefully get some answers for you if you are watching. So the first question, Jeremy, is how political are you as an organization? How political are we, Stories of Antisemitism?
I personally am not a super political person. I don't want Stories of Antisemitism to be seen as political. And frankly, it bugs me how often people automatically think politics when they hear the word anti-Semitism or Israel. And so I want it to be really clear. We understand that we do need our friends in government to allocate resources and create systems to preserve the safety of our Jewish friends. So we're not anti-political by any means. At the same time, the way I like to say it is, look, when our friend Jackson was walking across campus and people were hurling insults at him and pushing him and spitting at him, there were no politicians around, right? But there were other students, right? There were other students that could have said, hey, don't do that. Hey, we're standing with him. Hey, I'm inserting myself and intervening and getting in the way. And that's really what we're about, is kind of trying to cause this groundswell or this grassroots movement of normal people who will just be there in the moment. You can show up in the moment to stand with Jewish friends, to stand against anti-Semitism. And so, yes, politics are good, not bad. We as an organization now are really focused on people. Just your average person.
Yeah, and the people are the most important part of a society. I mean, United States, our society was founded upon the citizens self-governing themselves. And so, yes, we're super thankful for the politicians that are making legislation and taking care of all those needs. Those people are necessary, and they can make a true difference. But part of being grassroots, or really most of what being grassroots means, is that the citizens, the people, take some responsibility. They see something and they say, I'm going to tell my, congressman, or I'm going to tell the politicians that this needs to happen, but I'm going to step up and I'm going to do something to change this. And I think that's really what we're trying to focus on.
Yeah. Well, and that's why initially in the beginning, we called this Stories of Antisemitism, because we wanted to share the stories of Jewish people. We wanted to share the testimonies and the testimonies of people who were standing with them, because we want to humanize this issue, take it out of the political conversation and bring it down to, hey, what does it mean to you when you hear that this Jewish lady named Debbie is fearful for her kids when she sends them to Hebrew day school, or, insert any other example. But we're trying to remind people that anti-Semitism actually harms the lives of Jewish people.
Mhm.
And that's lost on too many people all too often because of what's happening in the media, because of what's happening on social media. So
Yeah.
we're trying to focus on people and their stories. And, as someone said earlier today in conversation, the facts and the narratives that are going back and forth, especially with kind of Israel and Gaza, they don't really garner sympathy or emotion. They don't get us to think about, oh, what do the people feel like? What are we going through? And so it's part of our strategy, not to be anti-political, but to be really focused on people and their stories.
Yeah. And so many people, and one of the roots of anti-Semitism and just all hatred is dehumanization.
Mhm.
And we're trying to kind of rehumanize the conversation.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of friends in in our Christian audience might say, well, I want to stay out of the political. Well, the reality is it's so much of the moral, so much of the stuff that we care about, kind of at the baseline, fundamental inside of our hearts is moral, and politics often overlaps with that. And so those conversations need to be had. Just because their politics are involved doesn't mean we can stay out of it. It's really important to have these conversations about moral issues like anti-Semitism, even if the political is involved.
Right.
And that's something that I remember all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I don't want to belabor this point too long, but we really hope that Christian pastors are listening. And we know that Christian pastors oftentimes have a difficulty addressing Israel or anti-Semitism because they don't want to get political in their churches. But I think we need to drive pastors, toward the human element of this, the justice element of this, even the right and wrong, the righteousness or the moral element of this. And then also we want pastors to hear us saying, hey, go back to your Bible. Your Bible actually has a lot to say about how to respond in times like this. That's why we look back, and some of the heroes of the faith in more modern terms would be people like Corrie ten Boom, or Pastor Martin Niemöller, or Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? Who in the World War II era really did take a firm stand in all of those areas, morally, even politically, and had to stand up. And they weren't worried about getting mixed up in politics. They were worried about doing the right thing.
Yeah, they were worried about the people. They saw what was happening on the ground.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, it's easy to not see what's going on. We might live in our own world, in our own bubble.
Yeah.
But if we are to truly love our neighbor like our faith says, this is an opportunity to do so, to get out of our bubble and to love them. So
Your neighbor. I like it.
all right. I think that was a good bow tied on that. So next question, Jeremy, and this is potentially, this is the most controversial
This is the
question.
question right here.
Are we Zionists? Dun, dun, dun.
See, yes, unequivocally, yes, we are Zionists. But I think when it comes to Zionism, we probably need to just try to define some terms here to make things clear. Because on one hand, you have the anti-Zionist crowd, or maybe the pro-Palestinian crowd, who would say Zionism is bad, unequivocally bad. Zionists are bad. They are racists. They enjoy genocide and murder. They want to wipe Palestinians off the map. They don't value human life. They want to steal Palestinian land. They are just really horrible people. And Zionism is a really horrible ideology. And so that's what that camp is going to say. Every Jewish person that I've talked to in the last few years about Zionism, every one of them give me the same answer. We just want a homeland. We just want a safe place for Jewish people to go and raise their kids and self-determine, and not have to worry about what your neighbor next door thinks of you, right? Because Jewish people all over the world, they have to worry about what their non-Jewish neighbor thinks. That's just part of the Jewish experience. So Zionism is a safeguard against that. It's the desire for a safe haven for Jewish people. So those would be the first two definitions that we have floating around out here in culture today. The third thing that I think we have to talk about as Christians, and this is important for our Jewish audience to understand, I think most Christians would call themselves biblical Zionists as well. What in the world does that mean? I think maybe to pull one Bible verse out of the Tanakh, out of the Old Testament, Psalm 132, verse 13, right? It says, the Lord has desired Zion for his dwelling place. And so as Christians, we see that Zion is a good place, right? And that God values it. And if we look at the whole of Scripture, we see that that God eventually wants to return his Jewish people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to that land.
Yeah.
And that kind of tees into, world redemption. And this is kind of the place where Christianity and Judaism merge, because we both say, yeah, we see a future messianic age coming where all injustice is done away with, and actually all the nations are glad. Like, imagine that. There's a day coming where nobody's angry that Jews live in the land of Israel, right? And, God actually says through the prophet, he says, you will look around and you won't be able to find an enemy. Like, I think Jewish people would agree that sounds like a pretty darn good day, especially in light of the season that we're living in. And so biblical Zionists are saying, we believe those scriptures. We believe that the Bible is true. We believe that God does have an appointed end to the suffering of the Jewish people, and that the nations will be glad in it. So yes, we love and agree with the version of Zionism that our Jewish friends would define as just wanting a safe place and homeland. But then also probably one step deeper for us as Christians, we say, yeah, it's also because we believe the Bible and what the God of the Bible says about Zion. So
Yeah.
biblical Zionists too.
And Zion, for those that might be unfamiliar with the meaning of the term biblically, it is a geographic place. It's Jerusalem. It's in Israel. And so it's important to remember, like, this is a place.
Yeah.
Not some ethereal concept or anything like that. This is a real place.
Theodore Herzl talking about Zionism in the late 1800s. And of course, he had a desire to get all the Jews back to the land, and especially because they were tired of the mistreatment in the nations. But long before Theodore Herzl, there was God talking about this place that was set apart for a chosen people, right? And as Christians, we read our Bibles. It's just what we do. You can't get away from it.
Yeah.
We go to our Bibles to answer hard questions. And we have to go to our Bibles on this issue. We know that our Jewish friends don't agree with us on all the things that we think about the Bible, but I think we can agree on a few things.
Yep. So to sum it up, we're evil Zionists, right? No.
Yeah, the dregs of society.
Yes, no, we're Zionists in the sense that it really meant foundationally, and still means to nearly every Jewish person, and biblically as well. But we would say that the attempts at caricaturing Zionists and Zionism is a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit outrageous, and it just does a lot of harm, and that's just not what Zionism really means to the vast majority of people, and what it meant originally.
Yeah.
But we are Zionists, and we're not ashamed.
We are not ashamed Zionists.
Yes, loud Zionists. All right, next question, and this actually, okay, so I know I said, are we Zionists, is the most controversial question.
This is actually, we got ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
This is the most controversial.
I apologize. I got way ahead of myself. This next one, get ready. Strap yourselves in. Do you think that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism?
Again, on one hand, I would lean toward mostly yes, but here's what gives me pause to say that unequivocally. It's the conversations that we've had with so many young people, and sometimes not young people, who would say, we're pro-Palestinian. We care about justice for Palestinians. We care about the loss of Palestinian lives, right? And when I hear them say that, I say, yeah, we agree. We can affirm the idea that there should be justice for all people, that we should care about all people. And so if someone said to me, I'm an anti-Zionist, I really care about Palestinians, I'd say, you sound pro-Palestinian, maybe more than anti-Zionist. It doesn't sound like you actually hate Israel. But someone who says I'm really concerned for Palestinians might say, well, I really have a problem with the Israeli government. That's fair. I criticize how Benjamin Netanyahu has carried out the war that's going on for the last 18 months. Okay, that's fair. That's something that we can fairly criticize. That's not necessarily anti-Semitism. So I think there's a little bit of nuance there. I think there's also nuance that I like to point out to people, in the sense that, hey, you might be more pro-Palestinian than you are anti-Zionist, right? The issue with pro-Palestinianism, when we're looking at protests, rhetoric online, is that it doesn't sound like, wow, I really love Palestinians and I'm trying to get food and aid and water to them and money and da da da. It really sounds a lot more like hatred.
Yeah,
It sounds like anti-Zionism
or Zionist.
or anti-Israel. And at that point, it's anti-Semitism. You hate the people, and if you're not applying the same standards for all of the other military conflicts in the world, and you're effectively applying that double standard, why are you applying it? Is it because they're Jewish? Because that sounds like anti-Semitism to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that like I have empathy for those that say, I just want to criticize what I deem as evil. And the first thing I'd say is, good, let's call
I
out,
need folks like you.
yeah, let's call out evil, but let's be accurate. Let's have scales that are equal. Let's not buy into emotionally charged, polarized narratives. Unfortunately, right now, that seems like it's 95% of the information out there or more. But it's a good thing to want to stand for truth. The problem is so many people that are saying, they're saying, I'm just criticizing. I don't hate Jews. I love Jews. I'm just criticizing. Like you mentioned, the method that so many are doing, not all, but so many are using, is anti-Semitic, is hateful. When you stand outside of Jewish housing, you say, I'm just criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu, and you're blocking them from going to class. Or like some of our friends have dealt with, just because they're Jewish, they have their kippas knocked off, they have their necklaces ripped off, they're barred from going to class. That is not criticism. That is hate, and in some ways that is violence. That is illegal. That is evil. And you lose credibility, and a movement loses credibility when they say, but I'm just this, but then their actions say something completely different.
Actions and rhetoric, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're demonizing or dehumanizing, your tactic is to get other people to hate Israel, Zionists, Jews as well. So even if you don't want to say, or even if you want to use kind of a technicality to say that's not anti-Semitism, well, it's still wrong, right? Because as soon as you can get the masses to hate a people or to hate a nation, eventually they're going to act on it. And those actions will cause loss of life. Those actions will cause harm to human beings. It's still wrong. Right?
Yeah.
That's why we have a government, a societal system that protects us against these things, because we know that's wrong. But I just have a story I'll just tell.
It's a great story. It's a sad story, but it's a really important story.
To me, I think this is where you watch anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism come together. About a year and a half ago, I was invited by our Israeli-American Council to watch the 47 minutes of body cam footage from the body cams of Hamas soldiers on October 7th. It was the worst 47 minutes of my life, just simply because that footage is just grueling. It's horrible and hard to watch. And at one point, I actually had to close my eyes because there's a scene where Hamas guy takes out a huge sharp knife and actually beheads an Israeli. I couldn't watch it.
I don't know who could.
And as I closed my eyes, I heard two things. I heard a lady behind me. The room was mostly Jewish. I heard a lady behind me I think she was having like trauma response, and she was breathing very heavily and rapidly, and she was sobbing. You could hear the sniffles and people crying all around the room. So I had the good friends that had invited me. I knew that they were crying. I saw it later. And I heard that. And then the other thing that I heard was from inside in the event was, there is only one solution, Intifada revolution. And the thought occurred to me in that moment, what kind of people stand outside of a building where Jews and Israelis, are mourning the loss of their loved ones, friends and family members? What kind of people are they that stand outside of that event and cheer for it? What kind of people are doing that? Like, these people clearly are not just a political movement. They're not clearly all about the Palestinians. There's hate being expressed there. There's a disdain for this people. There's even maybe a cheerleading for that loss of life. I mean, we've heard it in the rhetoric. Rape is resistance. And so if resistance is justified, then what kind of horrific things are justified against Israelis or Jews. And I think those people outside that event that day, they knew exactly who was inside and exactly what was going on. And that was anti-Semitic. Unequivocally, that was anti-Semitic. And so you can't tell me that that expression of quote unquote anti-Zionism was not targeted at Jewish people.
Yeah.
And it wasn't targeted at their pain. It wasn't targeted at their very culture or existence or at the nation that so many of them feel tied to as Jewish people. But that it was targeted at all those things.
Yeah.
And so that story, that example, I think is what tells me there's far too much anti-Semitism in the anti-Zionism that we're seeing.
Yeah, and not just a devaluation or dehumanization of the Israelis. And when you're talking about that quote, there's only one solution, Intifada revolution, like that is threatening to Israelis and Jews. But there's also, I remember we were at Columbia University about a year ago, and I remember one of the chants that they were chanting is, glory, glory to our martyrs, all our children, sons and daughters. They're glorifying the death of children. They want people to be martyred. They're saying, essentially what they're saying is, we want sons, daughters, fathers, mothers to die, some of which by suicide belt, some of which in military zones. That is the continuation of evil, and they think they're resisting evil by celebrating that which is evil, right? And so not just they're against, right, the Israelis and the Jewish people with the rhetoric and the actions, the people in this movement much of the time, but also the Palestinians. So they claim to be pro-Palestinian, but then they're like, we want all these people to die as martyrs. And how does that make any sense? And it doesn't make any sense to me. And so if anyone's like pro-Palestinian, genuine, like I care about Palestinians, well, first of all, you don't want them to die. That's step one. And so you may want to rethink the movement that you're in and have a different expression if you're really pro-Palestinian. That's something that I've been thinking about. So.
Well, and what they're talking about martyrs, I mean, that's a radical Muslim thing. And you and I both know we were there. Most of those kids were white kids from the suburbs of some city in America. They were not Muslims, right? So they didn't even know what they were chanting to talk about martyrs. But this kind of leads us into our next point. But on either side of the issue, some of those chants, what they show is a disregard and a devaluing of human life.
Yep.
Right. And the next question that we have here is, what is our perspective, the SOA perspective, on Palestinians? And we don't have a problem with Palestinians. We love Palestinians. We love Palestinians because God loves all people, including Palestinians. But we value human lives.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we value Israeli lives and we're not hypocrites, then we have to value Palestinian lives. We don't think that Palestinians are awful. I do think that it's necessary for us to differentiate some things. As I said earlier, the difference between a pro-Palestinian supporter and an anti-Zionist, I think that's probably a distinction that needs to be made these days. I think we also need to differentiate between Gazans and Hamas, right? Hamas, a terrorist group that governs over Gazans and is stated in their charter that they exist to wipe Israel off the map. Like, those folks are not very savory people.
Yeah.
And so do we hate them? We're Christians, we're not allowed to hate anybody, but we certainly...
And we don't, not just not allowed, we don't hate people.
No, it's sure. I was being tongue in cheek.
Yeah, of course.
But they've done wicked things. They desire wicked things. And we're not saying that every Palestinian is like Hamas. I mean, even in the last week, we've got the videos of people in Gaza rioting in the streets saying, give the Israelis back their hostages. We want to be free from Hamas. We want to be free from this war. I think that speaks volumes to the situation. But in regard to the conversation here, we love Palestinians. Palestinians need our support as much as Israelis do. And I think then it kind of brings into focus, actually, that maybe at the tip of the spear here in terms of the problem is really Hamas and their radical ideology.
Radical ideology, yeah, and it's rooted in their expression and interpretation of Islam, and it's heartbreaking to see because just from the baseline human being perspective, like you look at the Palestinians, you even look at the people that are part of Hamas, and you're like, this is such a destructive belief system. Like they're tearing their society apart. And you don't want that for people. And so you have to ask yourself the question when you look at that and you say, I care about these people, what path forward is best? That's hard because you don't want to. I know a lot of people are like, well, we want to be tolerant. We want to make sure that we're not trying to shove anything down anyone's throat, which I would agree with. We don't want to force anything. But when you look and you see this behavior that for decades and decades, this societal cultural framework that has been destroying these people, you need to ask yourself, well, that's not the way forward.
Right.
What's the best way forward?
What's best for Gaza?
And I know a lot of people would look at Israel and they say, well, they're not any better. But in reality, they're not this demon state boogeyman. They make mistakes. Everyone does. Every country, every individual makes mistakes. Absolutely. And are there some big mistakes? Sure. Absolutely. But on the whole, Israel values life. I've heard so many people from Israel say, if the violence ended, these walls, right, what people call apartheid walls, which are really just walls that keep Israelis safe, these walls would be gone in an instant.
Yeah.
They'd be gone in a moment. And that, I think, for our Jewish audience that's watching, I'm guessing everyone would say, yes, absolutely. If this violence is gone, we don't want the destruction of the Palestinians, So, and that's important to remember.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah. I mean, we've got friends that are Israeli and grew up not far from Gaza. And I played with Gaza friends. Gazan friends, excuse me, and they knew Gazans and they were friends. And so even our Israeli friends, our Jewish friends are saying, we don't hate Palestinians. We don't hate Gazans. In fact, we actually value their lives. And that's again, maybe it's one of those shared values that we're trying to bring on here in this first episode. But an important question.
Absolutely. All right. Well, those were the controversial ones. So take a deep breath. We're good now.
We did that in sync. That was very good.
That was good.
I'm proud of us.
We did not plan that, just so you guys know. All right. Final question, Jeremy. To kind of wrap this up, what do you want Christians to do differently moving forward or to keep in mind?
I don't mind kind of putting the fire under our Christian brothers and sisters because I honestly feel like I need it. They need it as an outsider or as an insider. Man, I can't talk right now. As an insider, I feel like I can say this. Don't be lazy. Don't be silent. Don't be complacent. Don't be complicit. We know the quote. It's been quoted many times. One of the people that says it is actually Elie Wiesel. He's one of the Holocaust survivors that wrote the book Night. If you haven't read Night, read Night. Fantastic book, grisly, but tells the truth. But he talks about the fact that when you're silent, you enable the tormentor.
Yeah.
Right. And so Christians, look, we can't be on the side of a tormentor. We can't be on the side of an agenda that's purposefully working to demonize and cause people to have a hateful viewpoint or opinion of Jews, of Israel. That's not a statement of whether or not Jews or Israel are perfect. That's not a political statement either. That's a statement of let's be, what's the word? Like activists, but the kind of activists that are circumspect, the kind of activists that are really thinking deeply and critically, not being duped by one side or the other of any political agenda or media spin, and that means we're kind of different. I think this is what Christians are always trying to figure out. What pastors are trying to figure out is how do we stand up for justice and not feel like maybe we're scooting faith into second place to be like justice warriors. But I don't know if there's as much of a disparity there or as much of a divergence between standing up for justice and having a Christian faith as sometimes what Christians think. And maybe because of the wrestle or because of the wrong idea, we're stuck. We're stuck being silent and enabling the tormentor, enabling wickedness. And then I think we also just need to believe in the power of small things,
Mm.
right? The power of taking a bouquet of flowers, taking a card, calling up the synagogue and say, just wanted you to know I'm your Christian neighbor and I live 4 houses down and we see what's going on. We're so sorry. And if there's anything we can do, we can help,
Yeah.
and I've heard reports from our Jewish friends who said, you don't understand how encouraging that
Yeah.
is. So I think Christians also need to understand that small things do make a big difference.
Yeah.
With our Jewish friends right now. And so all of those things are important, but just don't do nothing,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember before I started with stories of anti-Semitism, like I said before, I grew up in the church, going to church pretty much every Sunday. Um, we didn't really hear, and I know it's not really like a Sunday morning topic, but we didn't really learn anything at all about the history of Christian anti-Semitism and why the situation is the way that it is today. When it comes to the relationships between Jewish people and Christians, we learned cute Bible stories, which was great, especially as a kid. I thought that was awesome. But right before I started at the organization, I didn't start it. You did. I didn't know anything. Looking back, I really didn't know much. We're not really taught a ton about that in the church world, in church culture, and I'm still learning and educating myself. Like, I sat down at this table thinking, I hope I don't sound stupid because I don't feel equipped to be able to talk uh, cohesively and intelligently about these topics in some ways because it's so important. It's so integral to get right and to approach with the right heart. And if I was ready to rock and roll, starting working with the organization, and I was at a place, and I still am at a place where I still feel woefully uneducated. If I'm in that position and was in that position, I can't imagine, I can imagine most of the church is in a similar or worse position just in terms of education. So that's just hitting the point of education one more time, and then taking what you know and then going and like it says in the Bible, this is a Christian teaching, like, you have faith, great, but show me you believe by what you do, by your works. Super important to remember. So
Yeah, no, that's really good. You know, I'll say this and then maybe we can wrap up.
sure.
I ran into a pastor a few months ago who has a church in a very liberal area in Colorado. New people come to church every week. And he said, every week we make a statement at the beginning of church that we do stand with Israel. And every week when they make that statement, people get up and walk out. And maybe there's a lot of pastors who are going, I don't know if I want to do that with my church. I like kind of, maybe if we keep people around, maybe we can convince them. But, I think we've got to be careful um, to think that by by not talking about the issue, that we're helping people.
Hmm.
By not talking about the issue, we're probably actually perpetuating, even within our churches, at least negative stereotypes and tropes
Yeah.
that Christians may have. And those are bad. And the number of Christians that I've been in a conversation with where I said, oh, that's an anti-Semitic trope, what you just said. And they went, what?
Yeah.
I said, yeah, like if you had a Jewish friend, they would feel a little uncomfortable right
Hmm.
now hearing you say that. And most Christians go, I had no idea,
Yeah.
even the idea but I've heard this in my own family. Like I got Jude, right? Jude with this guy, like, you're
Yeah.
pointing at Jewish people
Yeah.
who, who were saying that they're cheap or that they're swindlers, that's not good. That's a negative thing. But I think the statistic that somebody brought out a few years ago in a study was that around 90% of Americans believe at least one anti-Semitic trope. And we got a lot of Christians in America. So
Mhm.
how many Christians are sitting around in their churches believing at least one anti-Semitic trope? And so part of the work that needs to be done by pastors and in our churches is even addressing what anti-Semitism is and isn't, because it should be, again, it should be that Christians are the most trustworthy, most loving, most active
Yeah.
people in standing with Jewish people and fighting anti-Semitism.
Mhm. And you mentioned stereotypes and tropes are obviously harmful to our Jewish community, but there's also like genuine threats to the safety of our Jewish friends as well. And that's something that Christians can stand up against. And that's why it's important as well,
Yeah.
right? And I remember, I might be misquoting it, but I think it was Niemöller when he talked about, at first they came for the communists and I wasn't a communist. So I said nothing.
Yeah.
Then they came for the socialists and I wasn't a socialist and I said nothing. And so on and so forth. And then he says, then they came for the Jews and I wasn't a Jew. So I said nothing. Then they came for me and there was no one left to stand up for me. I don't want to be a doomsayer, right? But we see things and we hear stories a lot. Our Jewish neighbors, they're struggling big time right now. There's a lot of animosity on a scale that it's rising significantly. Anti-Semitism is so.
Yeah. 400% in the last year.
400% in the last year.
Incidents increased 400% in the last year. And we're talking America.
Yeah.
Sometimes we think, oh, that's probably what's happening in Israel. No. That's what's happening like
In America.
in Massachusetts, in Kansas.
Yeah.
I grew up, in Denver.
Yep.
So it's a problem.
Yeah.
We can't be silent about it. I think what you brought up with the Niemöller quote is probably the perfect way to bring it in for a landing. In fact, we probably should have planned to actually just read that at the end. If we had been thinking, we would have gotten it. But we mentioned it, and I think that's an important call to action.
Yeah.
For our Christian audience.
Yep. Awesome. Well, I think we've covered everything we needed to cover, and
It's a wrap.
it's a wrap for everyone that is still watching, to our Christian and our Jewish audience, and anyone that isn't in either of those categories. We are super thankful that you guys tuned in and watched episode 1 of Amplify with Stories of Antisemitism. Like we mentioned before, episode 2 is going to cover the history of Christian anti-Semitism. It's going to be a broad overview. It's going to be really interesting. It's super important to understand, particularly for the Christian community, as we seek to step out and stand with our Jewish community to understand what's happened over the past 2,000 years. So stay tuned for that. Why don't you, if you're on YouTube, you can like and subscribe. You can share. Yes. Share.
Be active, be silent.
I'm the Gen Z. I have to say this part. Come on, Joe.
It's fun.
Or just follow us on social media. We have Instagram, we have X, we have TikTok, Facebook. If anyone still uses Facebook. Anyways, but thank you for staying and watching. And yeah, we hope to see you in the next one.